Welcome to Represent. My guest today is Amira Elghawaby, Canada's Special Representative on Combating Islamophobia. From journalism to human rights leadership, she spent her career challenging hate and championing inclusion. Amira, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Ray.
Thank you. So people know, they know your title, Canada's Special Representative on Combating Islamophobia. But what does the job actually look and feel like, on a day-to-day basis? What perspective or mindset helps you carry out this work effectively?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on your show, Ray. It's a great opportunity to chat with you, and certainly we've had a lot of opportunities to just interact in regular life ourselves. So, as you are aware, the role has quite a broad mandate where it is really to champion, to provide advice on the experiences of Canadian Muslims in relationship to Islamophobia and discrimination. The office was born out of tragedy. It was based on a recommendation made right after the Afzal family was brutally killed in a terrorist attack in London, Ontario, in 2021, June 6th. And so our communities had an Islamophobia summit that the federal government put together. The recommendation came to create this office alongside many, many other recommendations from all levels of government. And so really it is to be a focal point, a bridge between the government and our communities. We've had the highest deadly number of attacks against Muslims of any G7 country. And so by and large, the office is here to help mitigate against the types of attitudes and narratives and experiences that have sadly become a daily reality for far too many Canadian Muslims, and which impact all Canadians in the sense of undermining our shared values of inclusion and belonging. So all of that good stuff. Day to day, it really does look very different because, again, the mandate is so broad. So, for instance, a day like today, I had to put together some briefing notes related to some policy advice that our office has tasked with doing. I met with the Prime Minister of Canada a few weeks ago, and he reiterated his commitment to addressing, for instance, bias that's been identified at the CRA, and which our office is advising on. We've also been talking about other sort of policies that the government can accept advice from our office upon. So we're working on that. As well, there's a lot of public awareness that our office does. So for instance, we launched an Islamophobia guide, so understanding combating Islamophobia for more inclusive Canada in the spring. We've been now sort of thinking, how are we going to engage Canadians? Because this is a resource for anyone who's interested in addressing equity and inclusion in their workplaces and their schools. So our office now is sort of looking to the fall and creating a bit of an engagement plan on that, along with a host of other things. So from day to day, it looks very different.
That's amazing. So you said the office was born out of tragedy, unfortunately. So how did your journey from journalism to civil society to advocacy shape the way you approach your role and mandate today?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up here in Ottawa as my hometown. It's a place I love very much, and I often tell the story of sort of having lived with a lot of privilege. I say, in the sense that I did have very positive experiences when it comes to my various identities. All of us hold multiple identities, and it really helps shape who we are, who we become. So, being the daughter of immigrants from Egypt. Growing up in Orleans, the East End, being of Muslim faith, I was at elementary school when a school principal, tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, I was in the fourth grade with you and your friends, like to present about Islam to the entire school. There's only about 5 of us in a school of 150. And that was such important, informative point that I like to kind of speak to, in the sense that being different for a very long time growing up for me was something to share, something to celebrate, nothing to be ashamed of, certainly nothing that I ever anticipated would be a source of hate or division. And so really growing up with this, belief, I call it drinking the multiculturalism Kool-Aid, that in Canada, we can be who we are and celebrate the diverse identities that we hold and that we can share with one another, that enriches our country as a place of pluralism, of diversity, of, as I said, inclusion, all those, human rights values that really make Canada special. But of course, as I got older and started to actually take those, those rose-colored glasses off and start to learn, for instance, about the experience of Indigenous communities in our country, learn about anti-Black racism, learn about other forms of discrimination that have impacted people in our country, the Chinese head tax, Japanese internment camps, etc. Learning about these histories of our communities in this country. And then when I decided to put on the hijab about a year before 9/11, thinking that, hey, despite these histories, we still are a place where I should be proud to practice whatever faith I want. My father being the one that said, whoa, slow down. Are you sure you want to make this decision? Because he was very worried. He was, perhaps less optimistic about my opportunities with such an obvious barrier in his view. And I said to him, if I can't succeed in a place like Canada, then I can't succeed anywhere. Really having sort of, as I said, like really continue to believe and hold on to that belief. So fast forward, 9/11 happens. I just graduated from journalism school, and it was a horrible, horrible, obviously tragedy and attack in New York, but that had reverberations right across our world, including on communities here, like our community, that was suddenly looked at through a lens of suspicion, racial profiling, Islamophobia, and it was a term that I hadn't even been very familiar with. And all of a sudden, as a journalist, a young journalist, I came face to face with what it meant to be a community that was very much looked at as a potential threat, looked at negatively, and we saw hate crimes go up. We saw all of these systemic issues with our communities, rise. And so from there, I worked in journalism for several years, and then eventually joined the National Council of Canadian Muslims, where I sort of put my journalism skills to use in terms of communicating what our communities were going through, and really articulating how critical it was that while we addressed the very serious safety concerns that 9/11 brought forward, that we did not lose sight of our human rights values as a country, and that we ensured that everyone was treated equitably, and that our communities certainly deserved to feel that way as well.
So obviously this role comes with very challenging topics, including confronting the difficult reality of Islamophobia in Canada and its impact on communities. But I always go back to, how do you balance taking care of your own well-being, while still fully engaging and addressing the realities of people are facing?
I mean, I think it's a really important question, because any of us who work in spaces where our identity is sort of like right there, this is not a kind of job that you go in 9 o'clock, you clock in, 5 o'clock, you clock out, and it doesn't stay with you. When I am standing up or addressing, for example, issues of gendered Islamophobia, how visibly Muslim women are sadly affected by, the rise in hate, the rise in discrimination, the rise in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab racism that we've been seeing over the past 2 years. Understanding that as a woman who wears the hijab, after work when I go out, I'm still thinking about these issues. I'm still sometimes looking over my shoulder and worried whether someone might try to harm me or my kids. So it is actually hard to unplug from these types of roles, in a sense, because they follow us all the time. They're basically about who we are and the kind of society we want for our families and for each other. But I would say that the biggest way that I'm able to sort of do that self-care is, through hobbies, obviously, finding joy through reading or spending time with people I care about, watching movies, heading out to a movie tonight, Freaker Friday, with my daughter, looking for opportunities to just, connect like anyone else wants to connect. I think that's super important. And I also want to say, like, being on a program like this, Ray, like having met people like yourself, like there's so many Canadians that are, first of all, allies in the fight against Islamophobia, but that we also stand united against other forms of discrimination that other communities feel. So anti-Black racism, anti-Asian hate, all the forms of discrimination that we see in our society, really at their core, are about trying to exclude. So by coming together and saying, no, that's not the society we deserve. It's not the society promised to us, considering the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and human rights codes, that finding allies and friends that we make along the way, I think is a really important way of anchoring myself and reminding myself that after the role is all done and I complete, hopefully my mandate in the best way I can, that I will have made lifelong friendships too.
Amazing. Obviously, you've broken barriers in national leadership roles. What is one change you like to see to empower more diverse voices in shaping public policy?
I mean, I think it's been a learning curve for me to have been working inside government in this manner, because as a journalist or as an advocate in civil society, it's very different to then work within the federal government and sort of have connections with various departments and various officials to sort of understand how the sausage is made, and it's a very complicated, it's not easy processes. So if there's one thing that I actually think would be very helpful for our communities, and when I say our, I mean any Canadian, and in particular those who may not have exposure to policy spaces, is to perhaps give high school students or university students an opportunity to learn more about policy making. I think that within many of our communities, so now I'll speak about Canadian Muslims, there's a lot of emphasis on, becoming a doctor, engineer, and I know this is across other communities as well. Sort of those professions are very highly esteemed, and as they should be, they're wonderful. But we don't often talk about, hey, do you want to grow up and be a policy analyst? That's not a conversation that we often have around the dinner table. And I think that is a bit of a gap, I think, in the understanding of how critical it is to be working in public policy spaces and thinking about how do we improve the lives of Canadians along so many different lines, whether it's climate, whether it's, public transit, whether it's housing. And so I think that having more and more people with diverse experiences around those tables plugged in. I think you had on your show recently, or maybe it was last year, Mohammed Hashim, who's now at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. So he had helped, pioneer youth fellowships to the city of Toronto, and I think now the city of Edmonton and other municipalities, by bringing in communities that don't necessarily have that opportunity to work within municipal offices and learn how municipal policy is made. And that helps really create more and more opportunities for young people from diverse backgrounds to see themselves in these institutions. And I think that's the kind of initiative that we need more of, is really giving people the opportunity to see themselves in spaces that until now there really isn't as much representation as we need to see at various levels of government.
What is one thing you wish Canadians understood about Islamophobia and the people and communities it affects?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that sometimes perhaps is surprising for people to hear from me is that, I actually wish I didn't have to work on Islamophobia. I wish that, I could put my, my heart and soul into other areas of interest for me. For example, I really love working on issues related to workers' rights. We just saw what's been going on with Air Canada and the unions. And I find it really fascinating in our society to think about the rights of workers, the rights of corporations, and how we balance these competing interests to ensure, equitable outcomes for workers. I used to work at the Canadian Labour Congress for several years, and I really enjoyed that. And it was a bit of a rest from thinking about Islamophobia and human rights all the time in that sense. And so I think people would be surprised, perhaps, to realize that, look, You know, everyone generally just wants to get ahead in their life, work hard, support, either their family or think of dream of, having their own family one day. Racism, I think it was Toni Morrison that said this, but someone may correct me. One of the greats said, that racism really is a distraction. It's a distraction, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but a distraction from being able to contribute, to participate. It's meant to take us away from, our core, which is, again, to do everything we can to fulfill the things that bring us joy and that can allow us to contribute to our fullest potential. So I think people would be surprised to know, like, we don't necessarily want to be talking about Islamophobia. I wish it wasn't an issue, as I wish other forms of racism weren't issues, that we were essentially just, working all together without these barriers, without people treating us differently. But as I laid out in our recently published guide on understanding Islamophobia, sadly, there are so many stereotypes, there's so many narratives about our communities that persist, and which continue to this day to proliferate, in particular online, and really fuel misunderstanding and misinformation about our communities in ways that perhaps people don't realize is unlike many other forms of discrimination. That there's, for example, an Islamophobia industry, millions upon millions of dollars pumped into creating these misinformed, deliberately misunderstood and trying to demonstrate that our communities, for example, have no business living in the West or are completely incompatible with Canadian life or American life, which is so unfair and unjust, particularly when you look at how every day our communities are contributing and essentially that our human rights are not up for grabs, that everyone deserves human rights regardless of their identity.
Yeah, the first part of your response reminds me of a picture I saw online earlier, and it said, you're tired of talking about racism. Well, I'm tired of experiencing it, and
Yeah.
that's basically it. So,
Yeah, and it may have been
Amir,
Angela Davis who said that. So, those are, again, as I said, some great African
the
American
greats.
women who, yeah, the absolute OGs.
Amira, can you share a moment, big or small, where you personally felt the impact of your work in your everyday life, and a moment that made you think, you know what, this is why I do this?
Yeah, I think I'm going to choose two quick moments, Ray. I love that question. So, first of all, there are times where this work feels very heavy. And, in my mind, I'm telling myself, look, I got to do it. I signed up for this. But like my body, I can feel the anxiety. I can
Mm-hmm.
feel the burden just in my body. Like it's a physical reaction. And then I go out and I meet young people. And in particular, I meet young Muslim women, and among them, those who wear the hijab. And they will sometimes come up to me and they'll just simply say, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being out there, for standing up and speaking out and, just giving us a voice. And of course, they have their own voices, but sometimes, having that confidence to be out there, it takes time to get. So that always gives me a lot of confidence. And then the other moment, there's occasionally I get recognized, not too often, but occasionally I get recognized when I'm outside on my own. And I was once walking in Montreal near the train station or the bus station, and a woman came up to me, and you know, um, she was just wearing a baseball cap. She had glasses on. She was pushing her son in a stroller, and she's like, "Are you Amira Elghawaby?" And sometimes I don't know how to answer that question, like, who's asking, right? I said, "Yes, I am." And she started to cry.
Oh,
And
wow.
she said, "I'm Palestinian.
Mm.
Um, I'm a Palestinian Quebecer, and I am so grateful for you. I am so grateful that you've been speaking out and that you've been out there talking." And she just, she gave me a big hug, and it just meant a lot to me, because it meant that, for me, I feel like the effort is never enough in terms of speaking out for Canadian Muslims, for those who have loved ones in Gaza right now who are going through unimaginable pain. and trauma, and we're all watching it on our screens and doing whatever we can. But it really meant a lot for me to feel that this role really does symbolize for many people in Canada, again, that promise that we don't always, fulfill, but that we have made to ensure that everyone is seen and heard and respected.
Yeah. Amira, if you could talk to your younger self, what lesson or piece of advice would you pass on, especially for someone who wants to follow a similar path? Well, someone's watching as that young lady you met in Montreal in a straight train station.
Yeah. I mean, I often get the question is like, so how did you get to this point?
Hmm.
And my answer is always like, look, you never actually know what point you're heading towards. A few years ago, when I started in my work in advocacy, there was a lot of contention of even the term Islamophobia. So
Hmm.
to think that one day there would be an office to combat Islamophobia within the federal government, that could never have been something I would have ever imagined. And
Yeah.
again, sadly, it's because of having had 11 Canadian Muslims killed over a 5-year span in this country. So it's a tragic reality, actually, that we've had to create this office. But I would say to people and who would ask me that question, like, how do you get to doing the things that you want to do like this? I would just say you just have to do whatever it is you care about to the very best of your ability. Just work really hard, find your passion, work as hard as you can. And one thing will lead to the other. And there will be moments that sometimes we have to sacrifice the things that we want for our family's well being, it's not always a straight line. In fact, I took some time off to take care of my children. At one point, I was going to homeschool.
Mm.
I wasn't really thinking in terms of career trajectories. We go through phases and seasons, and so if there's one piece of advice is to just embrace the seasons, and recognize that change is part of life. And so long as you feel that when you're waking up, you have a purpose that you're fulfilling, that you know why you're doing what you're doing, that why is so critical, you will find yourself in places where you feel that you're making some kind of difference.
I love that. Phases and seasons. Yeah. Um, Amira, fast forward 10 or 20 years. What is one moment or milestone that would make you feel like everything you worked for truly made a difference?
Well, again, I don't know what lies ahead, but
Hmm.
I will say that I'm particularly grateful for having had the opportunity to create that guide that now I've mentioned a few times on the program with you, Ray.
Hmm.
And I really invite your listeners and viewers to take a look at it. This
Yeah, I'll
guide
share
on
it.
understanding, combating Islamophobia. For me, that is a huge milestone because no other government in the world has created this kind of guide. It really unpacks a lot of the stereotypes and myths about our communities. It talks about media, it talks about that industry, it talks about solidarity, it talks about what institutions can do. And half of Canadians have said through polling that they want to be allies to Canadian Muslims, but they also need more resources to do it.
Hmm.
So for me, it's really significant, especially as I've had a chance to share what Canada is doing internationally. I've had a chance to hear what other countries are struggling with, and we are ahead in the sense of having an office that addresses this and provides advice to the government, having a guide on this issue, and so I do feel that 2 years and a half into the mandate, having created this type of resource for Canadians and for anyone around the world interested to better understand what we're talking about when we say Islamophobia, I think that's a really impactful objective. But of course, more to come, and I hope that I continue to work with communities and fellow Canadians to think about what other ways can we make sure that we make it so that talking about Islamophobia becomes almost unnecessary simply because we've hopefully addressed a lot of that systemic racism that exists.
Perfect. Amira Elghawaby, thank you very much for your time. I like to end my conversations with this. We learn today and we lead tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ray, for the program.